Good morning and welcome. My name is Matt Abbott. I am the Director of Government and Diplomatic Programs at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. I'd like to welcome Ambassador David Bakradze. We're honored to host him on the Council's platform. I would also like to thank the staff at the Embassy of Georgia for their support of this program. The Chicago Council on Global Affairs is an independent, nonpartisan organization. Views expressed by individuals we host are their own and do not represent institutional positions or views of the Council. Please note that we are on the record and we are live streaming this event. We welcome your engagement on social media, but please silence your phones. We will also be taking questions from the audience after the ambassador's remarks, and those of you watching via live stream can submit your questions by typing chi.cnf.io into your browser. Before I turn it over to the ambassador, I would like to briefly introduce him. David Bakradze was appointed Ambassador of Georgia to the United States in December 2016. He also served as State Minister of Georgia for European and Euro-Atlantic integration and Georgia's ambassador to Greece and Serbia. He graduated from Tbilisi State University with a degree in International Economic Relations and International Law. Now please join me in welcoming the ambassador.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here. I would like to thank you, Matt, and I'd like to thank the Chicago Council for Global Affairs for this wonderful opportunity to bring the perspective from Caucasus. It is my pleasure to be in this wonderful city, and I'm looking forward to a lively discussion with all of you. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for attending this discussion. This year, Georgia celebrates 100 years of its first republic. Our history goes back centuries. We had 3,000 years of statehood, but the first democratic republic in Georgia was created in 1918. And this month is a month of celebration. In May, we usually celebrate our independence, our democratic republic, and the first republic with all the democratic principles and institutions in Georgia, and it was a social democracy, was created in 1918. So it was one of the first European states to have a big steps ahead towards democratic institutions, towards democratic rule. And well, it has lasted only for 3 years before the Red Army have entered, and before the 70 years of Georgia's democratic and existence was captured by the Soviet rule. And since we have regained our independence in 91, we have started to look out for the friends, and the United States was one of the first countries to lend a hand to support Georgia, and it was existentially important to help with humanitarian aid, but since time Georgia has developed also and has shown the transformational effect of the assistance of support that was coming to Georgia from United States, from European countries. Today Georgia is no longer a mere recipient of the U.S. support and assistance. We are strong contributors to the, first of all, Euro-Atlantic security. For some of you may not know, Georgia is one of the largest contributors in the Resolute Support Mission in Afghanistan. We had in Iraq, then in ISAF mission, now in RSM mission. All in all, 15,000 Georgian soldiers serving. We are now fourth largest contributor by number. Georgia is a country with one of the closest interoperability with with NATO, with alliance, and we are spending 2% of our budget for the defense, and we are spending 20% out of those 2% on acquisitions, which is the NATO standard. We are able and willing to contribute to international operations, and we are really aiming at becoming the member and full-fledged member of the NATO, but I think I will have an opportunity to touch that later on. That is one issue where Georgia has become a strong contributor and supporter of the US policy. Another issue is the democratic development. We live in a very turbulent environment, and Georgia has managed to give a good example of the transformational effect, and democratic transformation is something that makes us really proud. Georgia is competing not only with the countries of the region, but we like to position ourselves through the different rankings or ratings next to some Eastern European countries, some members of the European Union, as we see our end goal for the country becoming the full-fledged member of the European Union as well. What we have now is one of the largest possible cooperation levels with the European Union, which is association agreement, through which we are bringing European practices and legislation to Georgia, and therefore bringing Europe to Georgia as much as we can through legislation and practices, and preparing ourselves for the next waves of integration and engagement. We benefit from deep and comprehensive free trade area agreement with the European Union. We benefit from, and our citizens benefit from, the visa-free travel with the European Union. The last several years, starting 2014, 15, and 16, when all this has become possible, has shown very strong commitment and consistency of the government of Georgia on moving forward with transforming country and becoming a fully functional European democracy, but also has shown that when the country is prepared, when the country has all the benchmarks met, then some fatigue that might exist in European Union may not be an obstacle and can be overcome, and we have shown that, and that gives us a really good encouragement and incentive in the future when we think of the full-fledged membership, when we win both European Union and NATO. What is the strategic about Georgia and United States relations? In 2009, we have advanced our relationship to the strategic partnership level. Meaning that we have all the direction of cooperation where at the highest possible level, governmental level, we move ahead and advance our defense and security, our trade and economic, our democracy development, or people-to-people cooperation. We see this as a demonstration of both from Georgian side or from the US side, bipartisan, multi-party level of the engagement and willingness to move forward with our strategic goals. Our relationship have advanced on the US side, depending and not depending on the policies and administrations, and the same relates to Georgia. We have managed to advance our relationship at the strategic partnership level, and we believe that we have more space to advance our economic and trade relations, because Georgia and its location on the crossroads of the Eurasian continent gives a huge possibility for the US companies to engage and bring their priorities not to only country of 3.8 million that Georgia is, but to the larger market of 2.2 billion that Georgia has a unique possibility of the free trade arrangements. So Georgia is a unique country in that geographically we are on the crossroad, but also we have the free trade agreement with the European Union, with China, with all CIS countries and all our neighbors, including Russia, and with Turkey. We are now in negotiations with India. So with that, we see as a possibility to give this nice and very important floor to the US companies. We have more than 200 already. working in Georgia to advance their interests on economic or trade field through Georgia. We prepare for that with our advancing our potential for the infrastructure and logistics. We have almost doubled our budget for the coming 4 years to fully finalize by 2020 all major infrastructural projects and be prepared for the increased interest that is coming from south, from east, and connecting the large economies of Europe, like European Union, China, Central Asia, Turkey. And in all this, Georgia plays a significant role. So we want to be prepared for that. We want to see more US companies engaged, but we are really happy to have on the century projects that we have, which is deep sea port Anaglia, that it has started to be constructed and will be finished within 3 years, to see that US-Georgia consortium building this deep sea port, and US company SSA Marine willing to operate this port, but also being an equity partner. We also see interest coming from the Central Asia, from other US companies, to advance this possibility and to advance Georgia as a crossroad for the largest European economies, Eurasian economies. With the United States, we see the possibility that Georgia has been a very lucky to have a very strong friend of as the United States in our major challenge, and that is the challenge coming from Russia, which has occupied 2 Georgian regions. Starting from beginning of 90s, a lot of developments have been fueled around Russia in the different former Soviet republics. Some of them were separatist movements in Georgia's 2 regions of Abkhazia and Tskhin Valley, and that has led to internal conflicts, and in 2008 Russia has invaded and occupied 2 regions of Georgia. But before that, we have seen different forms of, now as we call it, hybrid warfare, something that is now on everyone's mind in the United States or in Europe. We have been subject to economic shutdown and energy shutdown, to cyber attacks, to different forms of passportization that was giving Russian citizenship to Georgian citizens living in the Abkhazia and Tskhin Valley region. And the Georgian-Russia market in 2006 was fully closed for any form of Georgian product, and that was the time when Russia was our largest export country, so it was devastating. But as long as countries survive for that, it was important that we have diversified energy routes. Now Georgia is self-sufficient with electricity. We don't depend on for oil or gas on Russian sources. We have diversified our export markets, and since 2013, Georgia had probably the most important moment on our democratic development, when the government changed through elections, and we have advanced in many fields where we had shortcomings, be it the media freedom, be it property rights, and some fundamental principles of the rule of law. And we are moving forward. As I said, we have advanced our European and NATO integration processes, but also we have started to have a more pragmatic dialogue with the Russian Federation. That has led to reopening of the Russian market for Georgian wines and agricultural products, but that unfortunately haven't led to any advancement on the political field. The thing is that Russian Federation has been using its tools, which it has now in Georgia, to continue and disrupt the policies. Russia, since 2008 invasion and occupation of two regions, Russia has started to build the razor wire fences alongside the occupation line. And in 2009 and 11, we had the first two waves of borderization. Since then, it continues. The closing of the checkpoints have really severed the human rights situation on the ground. Ethnically Georgian citizens living in the occupied region of Abkhazia have no right to get education, because they have no right to get education in Georgian language. They don't speak any other language. They used to cross the checkpoints and get education in the Georgia-controlled regions, but unfortunately, last year, out of 6, 4 were closed, and therefore this is disrupting and not giving the possibility to advance. There were 2 facts of killing, one at the occupation line, another in the detention facility in Tskhinvali. So with this neglecting the human rights concerns that exist, this doesn't help, to say the least, of conflict resolution process. On the other hand, we have changed our policy to the confidence building measures. We have started to give all the rights that we have for Georgian citizens to our citizens living in the occupied regions, starting with what has become available for Georgian citizens in 2013 is a free universal health care, and our citizens from the occupied regions are crossing over and getting free treatment. That is hepatitis C elimination program, which is very expensive treatment and which is free of charge in Georgia due to a very important program that we have with the United States. And they are getting that treatment. That is now the new initiative for the better future, which includes education possibilities not only in Georgia but abroad, which is also the visa-free travel that has become available for Georgian citizens. Our citizens from the occupied regions can also enjoy. That is also the DCFTA free trade agreement that we have. Our citizens can sell their citruses or hazelnuts on the European market. So with all that, we are trying to promote peaceful ways of confidence and trust building between the war-torn societies. But of course, the razor wire fences, the closing of the checkpoints, and with that, we have a disruption coming from the Russian Federation. So on all that, we have been really lucky to have a strong support of the United States. Last year was a very significant year in that regard. For the first time, the US Congress has recognized that 2 regions of Georgia's Abkhazia and Tskhinvali are occupied by the Russian Federation, and that the United States will not support financially any government that recognizes independence of those 2 regions. That is also very important messages that we got from the, I think, historic visit of the Vice President Mike Pence to Georgia after 6 months of the new administration. Mike Pence visited Georgia and delivered very strong messages on the territorial integrity, on the Euro-Atlantic integration and NATO membership issues. We had very important decisions, something we have been waiting for a long time to maintain security on the ground, which is sale of the anti-tank Javelin missiles. We have been working on that for years, and last year it has finally become possible. that has strengthened the security and stability in Georgia. These advancements send a very strong messages to the population that Georgia has taken a very right and wise path of the stable development. We have managed in facing significant challenges coming from the Russian Federation and its occupation of Georgian regions to create enough stability in our country to move forward with our European agenda, to move forward with our Euro-Atlantic integration process, but also to create very business-friendly and free economic environment for the foreign investors. Therefore, I will take a couple of minutes to describe that. Georgia is one of the freest economies in the world. We're number 13th by the World Bank. We are number 16th as easiest to do business. We are 8th least burdened countries by taxes in the world. And I'm saying the Heritage, World Bank, or Transparency International rankings. We have managed to grow last year our economy with 4.6%, which is twice as much as our major trade partners, and achieving that is not easy in this environment that we live. The IMF is increasing its support. The World Bank has just doubled its programs in Georgia. So did the OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation from the United States, which plays a huge role in promoting investments in Georgia and has put Georgia as a priority country of its lists. We have managed to attract the largest investment in our history last year, but all that we still think is not enough, as we need breakthroughs in many directions, and this is what the government is dedicated to do on the especially through infrastructure. We believe that Georgia will position itself as a most attractive place for the future trades, as a hub for infrastructure, for logistics, for energy. When we look at the European energy security, we see how important Georgia has become. When we see the trade between China and Turkey, which is increasing and will double with the coming 3 years, we see that importance of Georgia as a connecting link for that. We see the growth of the Central Asian market and Central Asian countries and their connectivity and increased connectivity with the European Union, and that's where Georgia is placed. So with all that, we see the new possibilities for our country to attract more interest, whether it's from the United States or from European or other investors that come to Georgia, that see the possibilities that is there. Where we see our future with the United States on bilateral level, we see that we have just launched the most ambitious program that we have had. We are launching this May. General Scaparotti, the commander of the European forces, will visit Tbilisi to launch Georgia Defense Readiness Program. For the first time, we have very extended bilateral defense and security cooperation, but it has always came to the point when we were exercising or training for more interoperability to move and contribute to the Euro-Atlantic security. Now this will be dedicated to the territorial defense of Georgia, and therefore it will have a significant importance for our stability, to maintain stability in Georgia. We see the possibility of the coming 2-3 years to show this progress on the Georgia Defense Readiness Program and think of the advancing our strategic partnership to the new level. We see the possibility for advancing our bilateral relations on economic and trade field. We see that Georgia is a can be a model country for the United States for the new fair trade deal. At the bilateral level, we see this possibility as Georgia is a strongest and the most reliable partner and ally of the United States in that part of the world, and the country that has been through very comprehensive negotiations with the European Union, with China, with other countries. We are one of the most easy countries to start and move ahead with the negotiations. We see that the agenda is full of the USTR office with NAFTA and other major treaties, and therefore we are patient and optimistic, but also optimistic for the future of our trade and economic relations. Therefore we see that we can achieve Georgia's advancement on its European and Euro-Atlantic integration. We see, and we are realistic in seeing the skepticism or the fatigue that exists in the European countries majorly on the enlargement, but we also on the one hand see what was the most successful policy of the NATO, and it was enlargement, as it has brought security, prosperity, peace to the countries where it has enlarged. We believe that when we see at the example of our Baltic friends who also were not, and Europe was not ready in 1999 or in 2000 about their future, but in 2004 they have become the members. And we believe that political situation in Europe can be ready, and the consensus between 28, 29 in EU or in NATO countries can be achieved. The most important thing is that Georgia should be ready. Should be ready on the one hand, be strong in promoting the democratic agenda, and the second, being wise in countering challenges, both conventional or unconventional, and we can talk a lot later if there is an interest what kind of Russian propaganda we face today in Georgia. And then we can wait for the moment when there is a strong political consensus on Europe for enlargement policies that Georgia will be ready for. And in all that, we see a very strong role and importance of the U.S. policy leading from the leader's position and not from behind. Leading is understanding what a strong contributor Georgia is or can be in the future for the Euro-Atlantic security and not a liability. And with this trust I am serving as an ambassador, I see a very strong support from the U.S. administration. I see bipartisan support from the Congress. And I believe that this relationship that now counts 26 years of diplomatic relations will definitely lead to a strategically higher level of bilateral relations. Thank you very much. Thank you, and I'll be happy to get your questions.
Thank you, Ambassador. We have time for some questions now. If you have a question, please raise your arm, and once I've acknowledged you, a member of our staff will bring a microphone to you. For our live stream audience, you can submit your questions by typing chi.cnf.io into your browser. Yes, sir, in the second row, please. And a microphone is on its way.
Hi. Thank you for very good introduction to Georgian position. Georgia is very far from the United States, almost halfway around the world. And unlike Baltic countries, it's very far from Western Europe, or for that matter, even from Eastern Europe. But it's right on the border of Middle East region. And I just wonder what's Georgian take on Palestinian issue and on Israeli-Iranian confrontation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just need to clarify that Georgia is not as far from the Eastern European. You said Georgia is continentally in Europe and not as close to the Middle East as you have described. We are actually, if we look at the European security map, we see some important challenges that we face, and one of them of the European security, one of them is Black Sea security. And Georgia has a very important and strong role as a country neighboring the NATO member Turkey on the Black Sea security. And our role in that will be increased in the coming summits that will concentrate on our advancement of the Black Sea security, which we think is important. Georgia also plays a very significant and important role on the Europe's energy security. The access of Europe on the Caspian are increasing through the alternative from Russia route, which is coming from Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, or Black Sea connecting with Europe, providing more and more energy resources independent from the Russian route to the European market. And from Europe's energy security, this is one of the critical importance. We have Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan, Baku-Tbilisi-Erzurum, the pipelines. We are now on the construction of the Trans-Anatolian, Trans-Adriatic pipeline that will deliver the Caspian gas to Bulgaria, Albania, Italy. And through this, we, I think, together with our neighbor Turkey, which is also a NATO member, we play an important role. So we are not as far as one may see, but I think the most importantly, with the increased connectivity possibilities, I think the most important thing is the values that we are so close with each other. Democracy, the rule of law, and human rights are the critical pillars of our democratic development. And this puts us very close with Europe. Value-based, and I can go into the history and start with Georgia being a state that was based on the major pillars of European democracy, which is Christianity, Roman law, or Byzantine culture, but that has been in our history, and that has been pillars of our development. But even today, despite 70 years of the Soviet rule, we have managed to advance our democratic record in the manner that we try to compare ourselves with the Eastern European EU member states. And that relates to the fight against corruption, that we are ahead of 11 EU member states, that is open governance and transparent governance, that we assumed the chairmanship of the OGP last year from France, and that presidency will be continued by Canada. And we are proud to be one of the first countries to provide all the public services under one roof, and that was something that was invention of 2011, and that Georgia has already exported its services to more than 15 countries. We are now creating the same one roof services for the private entities, both physical and digital, with preparing and presenting the front office of the government under one roof that will advance our services even furthermore. And with all that, on media freedom or on the rule of law, we can see Heritage Foundation or other rankings that Georgia is advancing, and that is exactly, the values are exactly the most important pillars that I think give Georgia our role, in addition to geography, and as I said, Georgia is Europe, to advance with our membership. With regards to the regional challenges, there are a lot of challenges, and we continue to follow the developments in both Iran or in the Middle East. We have 26th century-old friendship and brotherly relations with Israeli people who has lived on Georgia territory, and very unique friendship that we have. But we believe that Georgia, being located in the center of three major powers, Russia, Turkey, and Iran, Georgia, throughout the century, this small country bears genetically a huge intelligence about the region, which is, I think, an important contribution generally to understanding the region and maintaining the stable path of development that we have managed to wisely use. And we are advancing our agenda, and we believe that so will our bilateral relations with both EU, NATO, but also, on the other hand, US will advance.
Thank you. Yes, Ambassador Dalder, please.
Ambassador, thanks so much for joining us this morning. On NATO membership, you made an eloquent case for the contribution that Georgia is making to peace and security in the region, including the very real investment in military capabilities, the contributions to Afghanistan and other places. Similarly, on the strength of its democracy and the values, it is there. The third element that I heard when I was in Brussels a lot is the question of how NATO could fulfill its Article 5 complications towards Georgia. And it really has two aspects to it. One is the reality of the continuing conflict with Russia, and that conflict would then be imported into the alliance on day one in a way that it isn't today. How would you talk about that? And then secondly, how could NATO countries make sure that they could actually defend Georgia? And what are the improvements Georgia is making in infrastructure? And you mentioned infrastructure at the very beginning, but the kinds of improvements you're making on rail, ports, et cetera, that would make it easier for NATO countries to reinforce whatever presence might be there in order to defend Georgia should it need to be defended.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your work in your previous positions in Brussels, and I appreciate your presence here, Ambassador, and thank you very much for the very good question. About the Russia, I think the most wrong thing to do is to give Russia the possibility to hold countries hostage with its illegal, aggressive occupation of its regions. So if we take into the consideration that Russia has illegally occupied a region and has placed thousands of its forces there, and through that has managed to change one of the significant principles of the NATO, which is that no other country has a say on another country's future with the NATO membership. Therefore, we are giving this green light to Russia to move ahead and do the same with any other country, therefore hindering with its future. And we see through the different propaganda that definitely it is not in Russia's interest to see the democratic Georgia either in NATO or in the EU. And this is not only limited to NATO. We saw 2014 in Ukraine. We saw Ukraine's bid for the association agreement and DCFTA and where it has led to. So I think the most important thing is to realize that if we if we take into consideration the Russia's aggressive invasion in Georgia and occupation of its region, and that be a reason for Georgia not to become the NATO member. With this, we give a recipe for Russia how to manipulate with its neighbors' future of development of the independent country. But we still face the reality. We still face the reality of thousands of the Russian troops. One, Georgia has pledged at the presidential level, at the parliamentary level, the non-use of force. Georgia is repeating that it will never use force for the conflict resolution. We will never take gun, we will never take arms to solve this problem. The only solution to this problem is through confidence and trust building between the societies. And this is what our policy is directed to. Therefore, there is no question that the NATO membership will hinder or will encourage any possible military conflict on the ground. No question about it. Now, the formal part of it. I will not go into the details, and you are more aware of the practices that exist, but a very simple example is Germany, which has become the member of NATO with its full territories, but has got the territorial integrity and reunification after several years. So where some other practices, especially with Spain in the Mediterranean, etc. So there is a practice of advancing countries' membership. And also, I think the most important thing is to realize what Article 5 is for Georgia or for other. Of course, this is a pledge of standing together, all for one for all, for when we see the aggression. But the most important thing, I think, in Article 5 is the deterrence. Understanding that when country is the member of NATO, the other country will think twice or three times before hindering, and it was into the country's sovereignty. So I think this is a critical issue. I think very good argument is also, and I think important question is the defensibility of Georgia. And that is what I explained to be one of the important decisions on our bilateral path to move from the interoperability issue, which I think Georgia has been one of the most interoperable partners, as we are together with Sweden, Finland, Jordan, and Australia with the NATO, but also as an enhanced opportunity partners, but also moving to the territorial defense. So the coming 3 years we will advance, and other decisions are also strengthening Georgia's defense capabilities. I think Black Sea security will play its very important role, and very strong support together with the United States, very strong support by Turkey of the Georgia's pledge to NATO membership. All this together can lead to a very strong argument on the defensibility of Georgia. We understand that 2 years, 3 years ago, it was a question how the eastern flank's defense, whether eastern flank is defensible or not. And that has had a strong ground at that, but very strong decisions were made by NATO to strengthen the eastern flank, strengthen the challenges, the NATO's possibilities against the hybrid challenges, to move forward with the Black Sea security, and I think all this will lead to the very strong case of Georgia being as defensible as any other NATO member eventually.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am, in the second row, please. Thank you. I lived in Georgia for 2 years, and
good
I love
news.
your country, and I'm going back this summer. But I wanted to ask whether you feel that there is a rise in radicalism and neo-Nazi groups. I've been following the news lately about the protests right now on Rustaveli with the Bastiani protesters, and how the neo-Nazi groups are now protesting them. So if you could just speak to that, whether you feel that is just a small group, or if it's becoming any kind of vocal issue that's dealing with the internal growth of democracy.
Thank you very much. No, I don't believe there is any chance of radical neo-Nazi groups to succeed in Georgia. There is no chance. This is our history. This is our country that has been so proud of its diversity, of its tolerance, and I think that the latest developments also show that Georgia is the country which, if any challenges arise, the society is very strong in raising a voice. The government is always strong in listening to the public. Last night it went, I think, the first and the only possibility when the government and the protesters had an opportunity to discuss was very successful. And I think that there is no question, I don't want to go into the details, what has led to the protests, which is the fight against the very severe narcotics. That is the problem here, I understand, and we face it. We face the death of young people, and therefore we should be very strong in responding to that, but on the other hand, we should be more strategic dealing with that, and not just from one place to another finding the results of the problem, but dealing with the source of it. And this is the policy that government has, and this was, I think, discussed also, I assume, and that because that has led to the very successful end of the manifestation. Georgia always keeps surprising its friends that it always keeps consolidating people on the issues that matter. People always peacefully are vocal in expressing their willingness, and I'm really happy that government is always willing to listen to this voice, take it into consideration, move ahead, and advance our democratic or other agendas. And I think the last 2 days have demonstrated once again all that combined. About the radicalism, I don't want to find any excuses. I don't think there is any excuse for what I have been listening to, but they express some position of some part of the society. But I am very happy that the law is very clear about the expression, about the boundaries of the expression, and I'm very happy that the law is very strongly reinforced whenever it sees a danger on one fact by fact or in a longer term. We see that Georgia is moving to develop, and marginal forces will not find the ground for any success. I don't see that danger in our society.
Yes, in the back row, please.
Hello, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for coming to Chicago and sharing your insights about Georgia. My question relates to the Russian occupation. Can you discuss what is Russia's motivations and objectives with this occupation?
Well, if we look at the pattern generally in the neighboring countries that neighbor Russia, I think we have listened to the statement of the Russian president in 2007 Munich summit when he described the collapse of Soviet Union as the biggest disaster or catastrophe of 20th century. So the ambition that Russia should have an influence on the countries, sovereign countries of its neighborhood, is something that we have witnessed over the years. Georgia has been throughout its history, it has managed to maintain being one of the last countries and strongholds to maintain the Christianity, but we have been invaded by Mongols or Persians or Ottomans. So this is not new. This is something that we have been, strongly protecting our land, our religious and our language, and we have managed with more or less success to survive in the very difficult, but as these invasions show, very important geopolitical location. So this location is important, and therefore I think that interests that exist not only generally around its neighborhood that Russia has, but towards Georgia and towards its future is critically to be observed by our friends and allies as well. That Georgia is on the very strategic ancient Silk Road, now strategic corridor connecting Caspian and Black Sea. This is important to see the role of Azerbaijan and Georgia connecting Caspian and the Black Sea, connecting what's in the Caspian and Europe, connecting what's beyond the Caspian, and there are Georgia is a gateway to 8 landlocked countries, including Central Asia and Mongolia and Afghanistan, and their connectivity with Europe. These economies are on the rise, especially in the Central Asia. We see now the developments in Uzbekistan, very positive developments. We see the new ambitious, trade ambitions from Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan or Kazakhstan with Europe. So this is a critical corridor that connecting Caspian and the Black Sea we keep with Azerbaijan as flowing as possible. Not to be a bottleneck, that is the importance in the Black Sea deep sea port, which will serve the Panamax and post-Panamax ships, and which has the natural depth, and there will be no need for cleaning the grudging, or sorry, I don't know the name, but it's a natural deep sea port with a natural depth that will give this access to the Panamax and post-Panamax ships, and keep this connectivity with Europe. So this importance, as I talked about the energy, this importance is importance beyond that Georgia has as a country which is former Soviet Union and which Russia has a different, let's say, view of, as we saw through the president's address in Munich, that they want to see this influence of the Russia that has had through or during the Soviet Union continue. So this is against the Georgia's key sovereign aims and goals, which is creating democratic and sovereign nation, which is the family of the European family of nations, including European Union and NATO. So we continue our way. We keep stability because Georgia's economy cannot grow without stability. And of course, these challenges that weekly, monthly, daily sometimes arise from the occupation line, which is 10 more meters of razor wire fences, or 1 more kidnapped citizen, or 1 more closed checkpoint. These are the challenges that, of course, disrupt our internal politics, disrupt our stable path of development. So what we do is we keep our stable development, because we are, last for over the last 11 years, we have increased our number of tourists 12 times. We had 600,000 in 2006. We will have 8 million this year. So this is important. This is a strong contribution to Georgia's economy. We see last year we saw 2.8 billion of the investment, which is the largest we have had. We need to secure and we need to incentivize these businesses to come and invest to Georgia. Without stability, that is not possible. And we need to do that to prosper, to increase our GDP per capita, because one of the biggest challenges when we look, for example, Georgia's future in Europe and NATO is economic growth. We need economy to grow at the level that we will be a country capable of maintaining all the social or programs that Europe has for its citizens, for example. So we need to grow. We need this to show to our citizens in the occupied regions that this is the country in which you will prosper together with your citizens, with your co-citizens in a European state, which protects every single human being's rights, every interest, every language, every, let's say, tradition, or every, let's say, church or synagogue or whatever. So being the country that is capable to maintain our cultural heritage, being the country to maintain every single citizen's beliefs and being free in their beliefs. This is the European state that we believe our citizens in the occupied regions will want to live. So we need to show this, we need to move ahead with this, and we need stability to achieve this. So therefore we need the policy that we have now in the coming years to move our agenda ahead.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Please join me in thanking Ambassador Bakradze for joining us.